A big hello to you and welcome to VLGA Connect for another week, our weekly look at things that are happening across the Victorian local government sector with another great lineup of guests on the show this week, and it's all brought to you by Hunt and Hunt Lawyers. Very shortly, I'll be joined by the Victorian Ombudsman Marlo Baragwanath, her second appearance on the show in this calendar year. We're talking about a new report which looks at the outsourcing by councils of under-excess small claims. We'll catch up with Tony Raunic a little later for his thoughts on some high-profile mayoral issues in the news this week, as well as the progress of new bills in the Parliament that will bring some significant changes to the Local Government Act. And we'll find out more about the City of Greater Dandenong's sector-leading approach to flexible rates payments, particularly for those experiencing hardship. That's all coming up, but first up, we check out this week's Connect News. Well, Wyndham City Council remains without a permanent mayor after a second mayoral election attempt resulted in a 5-5 vote tie between two councillor blocks. A third attempt to break the impasse is scheduled for Monday evening as the council remains divided following the suspension of former Mayor Josh Gilligan in February. Yarra City's Mayor Stephen Jolly has said he'll plead not guilty to a charge of unlawful assault related to an incident following the election back in November 2024. Legal representatives for Councillor Jolly have requested that prosecutors drop the matter, citing multiple witness statements that support the Mayor's position. Latrobe City Council is facing a by-election following the immediate resignation of Morwell River Ward representative and former Deputy Mayor Tracy Lund. The VEC will oversee the process to fill the vacancy left by Ms Lund, who served for 5 years on the council. Marybeck City Council has issued a formal apology to artists Dr Jeff Hogg and Xiaoping Zhao after the installation of technology infrastructure damaged a ceiling mural in the Coburg Council chambers. The council admitted the work's integrity was compromised without artist consultation and has committed to a conservation project to restore the piece. The City of Casey has mandated a ban on artificial grass at the new Woodhaven development in Cranbourne North to combat rising urban temperatures. Council leadership and environmental experts say the move aims to protect local waterways from microfibres and improve tree canopy coverage in the southeast. Maroondah City Council will take a motion to MAV State Council for a review of the Domestic Animals Act after a statewide reduction halved the fine for nuisance barking. Councillors argue the current $51 penalty is insufficient to deter irresponsible pet ownership or to resolve protracted neighbourhood disputes. Yarra Ranges Council has won a magistrates court case against an Upwey landowner who destroyed 9 protected eucalypts without a permit. The resident admitted the offences and was fined $15,000. Mayor Councillor Richard Higgins said a quick call to the council could have avoided the penalty. Kingston City Council will take on selected Commonwealth Home Support Program services for Frankston clients after Frankston Council decided to withdraw from some CHSP delivery as national reforms roll out. Frankston Mayor Councillor Sue Baker says the council will keep services like Meals on Wheels, group outings and community transport. The council has set up a transition team and staff can apply for roles with the new provider. And Moyne Shire Councillor Karen Foster has been elected as the chair of the Australian Coastal Councils Association, a national body representing local governments managing shoreline change. Councillor Foster says the role will focus on unified advocacy and research regarding shared challenges such as coastal erosion and rising sea levels. That's Connect News for this week. For more of the latest on what's happening around the sector, listen to the Local Government News Roundup, brought to you by the VLGA and available wherever you listen to podcasts. A Victorian Ombudsman investigation into the outsourcing of under-excess small claims has revealed systemic issues in how these matters are managed across Victoria. The report highlights that more than half of Victoria's 79 councils use third-party contractors for this function. Today we dig into the issue with Victoria's Ombudsman Marlo Baragwanath, who joins me now. Marlo, welcome back to VLGA Connect.
Chris, thanks for inviting me along.
Good to have you here always. Now, your report into the outsourcing of under excess small claims reveals significant concerns about how councils manage the fairness and the transparency of these processes. What was the trigger that prompted your inquiry?
Oh, look, Chris, as most people know, we get roughly 17 to 18,000 complaints into our office each year. A significant proportion of those, roughly around 20%, generally relate to councils. There's nothing suspicious in that. Everyone has a council. It's a level of government closest to the citizens, and they provide a wide variety of services. But in the period 2022 to 2025, we did notice a trend of complaints relating to these small claims against councils. We had about 650 in that period, so we decided to take a deeper look. A lot of the claims that we were getting in related to issues such as council denying the claims, despite the people making the claims obviously believing they had a genuine case for compensation. There were communication issues, unclear decision making, and people were sort of unsure of what to do if they didn't agree with the decision. So we decided it was worthy of a bit of a deeper dive, so started the investigation.
So, how did you go about this, Marlo, and how did you choose the samples of the councils that you chose to look at?
Yeah, look, we analysed the complaints we had in, and we chose, off the back of that analysis, we chose four Victorian councils. We wanted to make sure that we also covered metropolitan and regional areas, small and large councils, which use those under excess claims handlers. We asked those four councils for their five most recently closed cases and reviewed them. We also met with the councils to discuss some of the cases and talk to them about their general approach to claims handling and managing the outsourced claims handlers. As you would expect, the handling of some of the claims was fine, but we saw some examples that raised concerning issues, and we explored three case studies in the report in more detail as they represented some common issues that we see in those complaints. We looked at how those four councils managed their contracts with the claims handlers to ensure they were making fair and reasonable decisions, but we also surveyed the remaining 75 Victorian councils to understand broader practices across the sector. We asked for general info to understand how claims were being managed and also to understand whether or not they were using those outsourced claims handling firms. So we took a narrow deep dive, but a broader general look at what practice was in the sector.
Okay, so it's representative then across the state, and you've highlighted that many councils and contractors represent the claims handlers as independent or impartial. Why is that a problematic characterisation, and what do you think council should be saying to residents instead of that?
Problem is that the contracts that we saw that the councils have with these outsourced claims handlers explicitly require the claims handler to act to protect the financial or commercial interests of the councils. But this is also supposed to be done in a fair and equitable manner by considering the experience and the rights of people making the claims. So if the contract's silent as to that second bit, the fair and equitable bit, the claims handlers, of course, are really acting in the financial interest. So saying that they're independent led some people to believe that the decision on the claim was impartial by someone whose commercial interests sort of didn't align with whether the council thought they were doing a good job.
Right.
And it means that when the claimant would get the decision, they may not view it with sufficient scepticism. They may have thought, oh, well, this is an independent body, that's okay. The claim must be, the decision must be really fairly handled. And it may have put them off thinking they could challenge the decision. So what we're basically calling for is for councils, when they're sending it out to this small claims handler, that they're really clear with the claimant what the status of that claims handler is. This is a contracted provider that we have, that we get to assess the claims and provide us with advice, rather than just suggesting it's this independent third party that's looking at the claim.
Yeah, it's an interesting observation. You also observe that some contractors are essentially pitching their services based on their success rate in denying claims. What do you say to councils about the need to balance that protection of public funds with an obligation to treat people fairly?
Look, I think this will be a constant juggle to manage the two issues appropriately, and I'm not actually suggesting for a second that that's always easy to do. I agree that councils need to, or they need someone such as a claims handler to assess or investigate whether whatever incident has given rise to any claim to determine whether the council is liable for the damage in part or in full. And that is part and parcel of managing your finances responsibly for a council. But in order to ensure that they're treating claimants fairly and on the merits of a claim, councils need to, or ensure that their claims handlers do things like listen to the claimant and understand the circumstances of the claim, communicate clearly and explain the process that will be followed, like be clear about what the claims handler's role is, be clear about, how long the process is likely to take, who they can contact for updates, explain, don't use legal jargon. That was another thing that we found. People were sort of quoting or citing case law that wasn't necessarily entirely relevant, or presenting things as more legalistic than they necessarily were. It's really just, I'd say, 101 good complaints handling practice, to my mind. Then when the decision is communicated to the person, explain their review options, whether it's the substantive decision or that someone's objecting to, or the process that was followed, or poor communication. There should be an avenue for review that is independent of the original decision maker, and that that reassesses sort of, or looks at the merits again, without sort of the interference of the original decision maker. So again, I'd say it's principles of good complaints handling, Chris, to my mind.
You've said that a couple of times, and a key finding in the report is that councils don't necessarily record a denied claim or a dissatisfied claimant as a formal complaint. How does that sit with council's obligations under the Local Government Act?
Oh, look, it denies procedural fairness and review rights. The central protection in the Local Government Act is that decisions must be made fairly and on the merits, and with the affected person being given an opportunity to be heard in that process. We documented multiple cases where claimants were either clearly distressed or dissatisfied, that councils had failed to acknowledge that this was a complaint in part, and that no review option was explained or offered. So what this happens when this dissatisfaction is not recorded as a complaint means there's no obligation to reassess the decision. The review rights become unclear or effectively inaccessible. You're sort of saying, too bad, so sad, that's the decision, when it's not actually the case. And people may incorrectly believe that there's no other avenue other than going to court, which for most people is really sort of out of the bounds of accessibility for financial reasons. So it undermines what we're saying is basic procedural fairness, and which is a cornerstone of the lawful and administrative decision making that the Local Government Act explicitly anticipates.
First use of too bad, so sad, I think, on VLGA Connect. So
there you go.
Well done. What do you think about councils outsourcing small claims handling in the first place? Should it be something that's dealt with in-house?
Look, I do not for a second suggest that there's a one-size-fits-all answer for how councils manage the range of complex and competing demands and critical services that they need to deliver to their community. They operate in vastly different contexts. You've got metropolitan councils, rural councils, large councils, small councils, etc., and they need to make decisions about what is the best sort of manner of service provision in their own area. And I'm not proposing to interfere in that for a second, but I think so the approach to managing small claims is a matter for each individual council to make, and indeed over 50% of them use these small claims handlers. But what this report does remind councils is that the community still expects them to manage those outsourced contractors and to make sure that they're still complying with the obligations the council holds under the Local Government Act. So yeah, up to councils how they do that, but just make sure you're managing it to the standards that you're expected to deliver.
Is a potential consequence of this report, Marlo, that councils feel more pressure to pay out more claims, and that then has a flow-on effect in what's already a pretty constrained fiscal environment?
To be really crystal clear, Chris, I'm not for a second suggesting that councils need to pay out more money. That's not what this report is about. And in actual fact, if they were paying out claims for which they weren't liable, that would be pretty financially irresponsible, and I'm sure the Auditor General might then have something to say about that. So they'd meet another integrity agency. What we're saying is that the councils need to ensure that the process for managing small claims is robust and balances that question of financial sustainability with fair and ethical outcomes. So even if they outsource the handling of small claims, again, I just reiterate, they can't outsource their responsibility to treat people fairly.
Yeah. There might be people who've had matters dealt with in the past that they felt were unfair, looking for some recourse now as a result of this report. What do you say to those people?
Look, if you've had a claim recently denied by a council, I'd say go to the council and make a complaint. Ask the decision be reviewed to determine if it was fair and reasonable, and open to the council on the circumstances of the case, and ensure that the decision was made on its merit. If the decision was made by a particular outsourced claims handler or even a council staffer, I would just be asking that the council review that independently of the original decision maker. So I don't think there's anything to stop people from asking the council to review some of their recent decisions around claims.
Okay, the new report tabled in the Parliament this week. We'll pop a link into the show notes for people who'd like to dig even deeper into that. Marlo, last time you were on, you'd just released a report in conjunction with other integrity agencies about resourcing. Anything new to report on that at this point?
No, other than our Oversight Committee of Parliament has been the Integrity and Oversight Committee. The Upper House has asked that they conduct an inquiry into our funding for the 26-27 financial year, and that report be tabled on the same day as State Budget Day. So watch this space, Chris. I may have more to report later.
All right, we'll look forward to that. And of course, open invitation for you to come back anytime there are issues of interest and relevance to talk about. Marlo, thank you. Great to have you back on VLGA Connect.
Thanks, Chris.
That's Marlo Baragwanath, the Victorian Ombudsman. Well, up next on VLGA Connect, we've got a bit to catch up with Tony Raunic on that's been happening around the place the last week or so. Tony, of course, from Hunt and Hunt Lawyers, our sponsors. Tony, how are you doing?
Good, Chris. Been all over the state this week. A couple of days in Melton doing staff training, and out at Baw Shire doing a bit of councillor work on planning interactions policies. Bit of time at Kingston.
Excellent. Right, you really are racking up some miles.
Somewhere else, Chris.
Or kilometres.
Wyndham, that's where I got to.
Oh, Wyndham. Well, let's talk about, I was going to start with Yarra, but let's start with Wyndham, seeing as you've opened that door. The mayoral deadlock there has people a bit fascinated. For those who haven't caught up, on Wednesday night, there was an attempt to elect a mayor to fill out the remainder of the term. This is because Josh Gilligan was suspended from the role after an arbiter ruling in February. What's happened here, Tony, is two attempts at the meeting to elect a mayor, split 5-5 along those factional lines. Another attempt, a third attempt scheduled for next Monday. Can you recall a situation like this happening in the past?
I reckon it has happened, Chris. I've got this vague recollection of a council going to the ministers saying we can't work, we don't know what to do. But it is a nasty situation. You've got to wonder whether this deadlock will be resolved, as you say, on Monday night when they have a third attempt to break the tie, if you like. Councillor Gilligan's suspension does conclude on the 25th of March. So assuming that no councillors actually change their position on the mayoralty and who they wish to vote for come Monday night, then I assume that we'll go for a fourth attempt when Councillor Gilligan has returned, and one would assume that additional extra vote will be able to break the deadlock, and we'll have we'll have at least a 6-5 position and an absolute majority as required under the Act.
Question without notice. So Councillor Gilligan's been suspended for 30 days or a month. The Act requires an election to fill the mayoralty within, is it 30 days or is it 28 days? What does the Act say?
No, it's within 30.
Right.
So, but an election has occurred. We've had two elections. They just haven't produced a result that complies, and they haven't produced the absolute majority. Yeah.
So you're saying that requirement could have been satisfied by the attempt to elect the mayor?
Yeah, I that's my interpretation, and provided there's continued, genuine attempts, and there's not some sense of deliberate stalling until Councillor Gilligan returns, then I think that that the council's doing all it possibly can do to try and resolve this. And I would imagine that there wouldn't be any intervention externally, and it would allow the process to flow through, and potentially, if necessary, another vote to occur when Councillor Gilligan returns to office. And Yeah.
So what about those people who say, why haven't they just drawn from a hat to decide this? It's not that simple, is it?
Yeah, and you mentioned this last month, in which or last episode, Chris, and which I did go back and have a look at the act. You were quite right. Um, the provisions in the legislation now require election by an absolute majority, um, and so those drawing out of a hat scenarios that we see under the governance rules aren't typically used. Although I guess if you did draw out of a hat informally. Um, you could then go back into the room and vote. And if provided there was an absolute majority vote in favour of the person whose name got drawn out of the hat, you'd actually comply with the provisions. But
Yeah.
those draw out of the hat arrangements are much more informal, and you might be, suspending standing orders for a period to do that and then come back in. You still need an absolute majority vote to elect the mayor.
I know a former CEO who tells a lovely story about having a bingo ball machine and having to draw the ball out to elect the mayor. It was going back a long time. Of course, things have changed since then. All right, we'll be watching with great interest on Monday night. There's nothing to suggest that anything is changing before then, so I suspect it's going to be take four at some point, as you say, Josh Gilligan back on the 25th, and that would, of course, break the deadlock if it's still in place by then.
Yes, one would think, yeah.
All right, that's Wyndham. Let's look at the other mayoral issue that's been making headlines, and some interesting headlines here. The Mayor of Yarra, Stephen Jolly, who's looking to have his assault charges thrown out of court, and held a press conference after a hearing this week in front of 7 News and 9 News journalists, which played out very interestingly on the nightly news, you'd have to say, with what they described as some wild assertions. What did you make of this?
You've got to give it to Stephen Jolly. He answers a question, and he seems to not be sort of dancing around the issues. I think he got asked questions about whether he'd ever taken illicit drugs or smoked marijuana and these sorts of things, and he was quite candid about that. But as you say, the he's going through a process at the moment in relation to an unlawful assault charge. It's a magistrate's court process. He's pled not guilty. Indeed, in the past week, his defence lawyers told the magistrate that, we've got 6 sworn witness statements that say Councillor Jolly did not, in fact, assault anyone. He's still the mayor, Chris. He's still a councillor.
I wondered about this. So, given you've had a Maribyrnong mayor stood aside because of a case, we've had the Kingston case, we've had another that not coming to mind immediately. Why is Stephen Jolly still in office?
Well, it's because of the trigger for a stand down. So Section 229 of the Local Government Act says that if you're charged with an offence that carries a potential sanction of 2 years imprisonment or more, then it's an automatic stand down. And this offence, whilst it's, unlawful assault, the maximum penalty is 3 months jail. So it doesn't meet that threshold, and so there's no necessity for Councillor Jolly to be stood down.
Right. Of course, the other one was Don Henderson, the current one at Hepburn that we spoke
at Hepburn
of.
correct.
Yeah.
So this one goes to they call it a contest mention in the magistrate's court, but where someone pleads not guilty, there's a bit of a procedural pre-trial hearing comes up where they talk about, how the case will be managed, what are the disputed issues. So I think this has got some way to play out, Chris. I think this is, it's probably unlikely to be resolved on the 25th of March unless the charges are dropped. And we're probably going to see this play out well into the middle of the year.
So just as an aside, given those comments that have been broadcast on the nightly news, how damaging do you think that will be longer term for Councillor Jolly and the reputation of the council?
It remains to be. I think Councillor Jolly is very well known to his community. I don't want to be political, but he's been re-elected, I think, 6 times. I don't think that his style the way he goes about it is particularly unpopular in the city of Yarra, and I don't think I can't see the voters punishing him, but I can imagine that there's a few communications people at the council who are probably going, "Oh my gosh, he obviously didn't read the notes we gave him."
I think there's no question he was not acting on advice from any comms or PR people in that particular instance. All right. Let's see what happens next there. As you say, it could take some time to play out. And the other issue I wanted to get your thoughts on this week, Tony, are a couple of bills in the Parliament. They're making their way through. I think they're sort of further through than not. And these will bring some pretty significant changes to the Local Government Act if passed.
Yeah, we talked about these a couple of episodes ago, Chris. The first one with the somewhat unwieldy title of the Entities Legislation Amendment Consolidation and Other Matters Bill 2025. Sounds like the sort of
Excuse me while I
tome
fall
that
asleep.
some lawyer be reading in bed at night. Not this one, let me tell you.
Yeah.
But just a reminder for viewers, that includes some amendments to the 1989 Local Government Act around this issue of rate caps. And the amendments remove the Essential Services Commission's advisory function in relation to the setting of average rate caps and the requirement for the Emergency Services Commission to prepare a biannual report on outcomes arising from the caps. Now, as at today's date, that bill has passed through the Legislative Assembly. So the lower house, it's been gone up to the upper house, the Legislative Council. The opposition did propose amendments in relation to this aspect affecting the Local Government Act 1989. In fact, the opposition proposed that this whole clause, removing the ESC's advisory function, be removed. However, that wasn't accepted by the government, and the bill's now back down in the Legislative Assembly for consideration. I think it's likely to pass on the numbers, Chris, and we will see this change to that rate cap process.
Now, not to be too confusing, that one's bringing changes to the 89 Act. The other bill's bringing changes to the 2020 Act. And I don't know why. I just find it so annoying that we still have two acts that are in play here.
Could have consolidated the two in a fresh bill, couldn't they? The second bill, the Regulatory Legislation Amendment Reform Bill 2026, and these are what they call omnibus bills, Chris, which is just they cover lots and lots of pieces of legislation. They're updates for multiple pieces. This includes updates to the Local Government Act 2020 around the definition of serious misconduct, really just bringing the element of the release of confidential information by a councillor into line with the Section 125 offence in the Local Government Act 2020. There's also a provision in there a new provision which would prohibit a council from appointing as CEO any person who's been a councillor within the past 2 years of that council, right? So it's a provision that would prevent, a former councillor within the last 2 years becoming the CEO of that council. At the time we go to air, Chris, the bill has been through those first, second, third readings of the Legislative Assembly. It's now before the Legislative Council for consideration. I don't think there's much controversy around these elements. And I imagine this bill will sail through as is in terms of its impact on the Local Government Act.
The one about prohibiting a council from appointing a former councillor of 2 years duration, or 2 years past rather, as a CEO, that interests me. Where has that come from? What's the trigger been for that? Of course, the CEO can't appoint a councillor to council staff or an ex-councillor for that period of time, can they? Why this now, do you think?
Yeah, and sing out to Reece Thomas, a friend of the show. I think he's mentioned some of this on my LinkedIn feed, but presumably this is really to fix an omission in the current provision, which, as you say, Section 48 of the Local Government Act, Chris, says that the CEO can't hire a former councillor onto the council staff within a period of 2 years after they cease being a councillor. But of course, that's who the CEO hires. Doesn't talk about who the councillors hire as CEO. So presumably, this is just to make sure that not only is it all council staff, that this provision, this prohibition on ex-councillors becoming assuming that office within 2 years. The provision will also apply now to CEOs. And so any councillors out there who are contemplating performing the role of CEO and think I might resign because my mates on the council will definitely appoint me, understand that if this provision takes effect, there'll be a 2-year prohibition on that. Chris, have we seen, I think we have seen some former councillors become CEOs. In fact, it's a fairly, it's not a highly unusual thing.
Well, it's not, but at the council where they served as a councillor, I think is a little more rare than a former councillor becoming a CEO somewhere. And we've seen it go the other way too. We've seen former CEOs become councillors and mayors, and that's, I think, more likely to have happened in the same council where
I
they
think it's
served.
the mayor of Bawbaw, I think, is the former. I think it's the mayor, Kate Wilson, but certainly one of the councillors at Bawbaw is a former senior officer at the council. So as you say, it works both ways, Chris. And but I think overall, one would, other than the issues of the diplomacy and the difficulties of managing relationships when one has previously worked in that same council, the notion that a CEO has had experience being an elected official, or an elected official has had experience managing within a council at senior level, to me, that just really adds to their resume and expertise. And I can think of, as I say, we mentioned Michael Tudball last week, a former councillor at Moorabool. I think, was Rebecca McKenzie a councillor, Chris?
I don't think so. Leanna Thompson certainly
Leanna
was.
Thompson, that's what I'm thinking of, yeah.
Yeah, a councillor and, of course, ultimately a CEO, and I think now a director at Wyndham City. Well, I don't think, I know. All right. Yeah, interesting stuff, Tony. Never a dull moment, as they say. Thank you for bringing us up to date on all of that. I think we've got a special episode next week, so we'll probably give you a week off, and we'll no doubt have more to talk about when we see you next.
Awesome. I can sleep in next Friday, Chris.
Thanks, Tony. Tony Raunic from Hunt and Hunt Lawyers. Recently on VLGA Connect, we've talked about the new ministerial guidelines that have come into effect, requiring councils to effectively do more to deal with hardship issues for people in terms of how they pay their rates. One of the examples of how this can be done effectively that's been held up in recent weeks is what's happened at the City of Greater Dandenong. And I really thought it might be good to dig into what actually is the approach that Greater Dandenong has taken, and who better to tell us than the council's Rates and Revenue Coordinator, Sally Wright. Hello, Sally. Welcome to VLGA Connect.
Hi, Chris. Thank you, and thanks for having me on.
Lovely to have you here. And you've been there about 3 years, so you've been there pretty much from the inception of this approach at Greater Dandenong to how you deal with those hardship cases.
Absolutely, yeah. So about 3 years now, and just trying to help our municipality and our residents as much as we can.
So take us back to the start of this journey. What was the impetus or the motivation for introducing an approach that it's fair to say not a lot of councils have implemented to date?
I think it kind of started with, especially post-COVID, we noticed a lot of people were really struggling to pay their rates. I think in Victoria in general, arrears are going up, people are struggling. We kind of took a holistic approach of how do we help our residents? What's the easiest way? I mean, no one enjoys getting a rates bill, but what's the easiest way that we can support them, educate them, and trying to assist them in making the payments as easy as they can?
So you say you noticed that a lot more people were struggling to pay their rates. Did the impetus for introducing this new approach come from councillors or from within the organisation?
I think a mix of both.
Yeah.
Our councillors are pretty in touch with their community, so they have a push and they're always getting questions and comments about it as well. But internally, I know particularly in my team, we have very much a customer-centric approach. So how do we help people rather than forcing and being more of an authoritarian body as such?
Yeah.
It's more an approachable, empathetic approach that we try to take.
Rather than imposing an approach from above, for want of a better description. So, what have you done there that's different, do you think? Because I know you get a lot of calls from other councils, don't you?
Yeah, we do. A lot of councils are calling us to see what we're doing and how we're doing it. So what we introduced first off 3 years ago, we did a flexible payment option. So basically, you get your rates bill in July, August each year. It's a big lump sum of money to be paid 4 times a year, or annually if they're an annual council. So what we did with the flexible payment, we allowed people to break it down into chunks to suit their payment schedule of when they get paid from work, etc. So we can do weekly, monthly, fortnightly payments just to make it a smaller bite size piece is the first thing we did.
Yeah.
And that's been really popular, really
Well, that's a
good.
big change, isn't it, from the traditional approach of either, as you say, annually or the quarterly payment. Some councils didn't even used to provide the quarterly payment option. I can remember that as a ratepayer. We've come a long way. So did you set out the different frequencies of payments that you would accept, or is it truly open for each individual to determine that sort of schedule?
It's a bit of both. So we have set, I suppose, timeframes whether the minimum is weekly, then the fortnightly, monthly, or they can buy by installment. That's up to them.
Yeah.
But the day that they get the money comes out or they pay, that's up to them. So when they start that plan, how frequently it comes out, what day it is, it's all their choice.
Yeah. So that's the single biggest change. Have you made other tweaks to the payment arrangements?
Yeah, so basically we've done some tweaks to the hardship, how we apply it, how we assess it, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Not too many changes there because when people are in hardship, they're really in hardship. And also we've been a bit more proactive in making contact with people. If we notice they're in arrears or if they're falling behind, we'll make contact with them and say, how can we help?
Yeah.
What do you need from us? Can we put you on a payment plan to stop the interest, that sort of thing? Try to get them back on track.
And what's been required internally in terms of the systems you use and the way you go about implementing these changes? Has that been a big culture change internally?
Our system pretty much has remained unchanged. It's more we've introduced payable, which is our flexible payment option. So that's a new one that everyone had to learn, which was very user friendly. So that was quite easy for us to do.
We've had Dalis from Payable on the show actually to talk about that system that they use. So it's good to hear from the council end that it does work the way they say.
It does work the way they say it does. It's very user friendly. Our customer service team use it. My rates team use it. So very user friendly. And the other systems we've done is we've got a lot more, probably more resourcing. I say a lot more, there's an extra person. Resourcing in terms of that proactive contacting, making people, like not making people, but trying to SMS them, email them, call them, trying to get them to contact us, basically.
Yeah. So on that, what has the response from the ratepayers been like to this approach?
I think it's very positive, especially when I suppose traditionally you used to have people saying, well, why didn't you tell me I was in arrears? Why didn't I know until 4 years down the track and they have a huge bill that they need to pay? Whereas now we're trying to say, we're noticing what can we do? If you go on a payment plan, you're not being charged interest. So just trying to engage. And I think the engagement is the biggest step and it's the biggest hurdle that councils are trying to get over at the moment.
Yeah. Were you surprised to be held up as a case study when the new guidelines came out?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. It's a nice surprise, though. It's not a bad surprise. It's very nice to be recognised, I think, especially in the rate space. We're not ones that are usually held up with their trophy or an award. So
Yeah.
it's a nice surprise.
So you said you've had lots of councils contact you, and they're not just from Victoria, as I understand it. You've had interest from right around the country.
Yes, I've spoken to a couple of councils in South Australia, New South Wales, and I think a couple in Queensland as well. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And they're all dealing with the same issues, are they, on how to make the system work better for their ratepayers, for their community?
I think it's a change in how councils are looking at collecting the resource or the money we need to provide the services. So that's a nationwide issue,
Yes.
not just a state issue. I mean, Victoria's legislations have made it and guidelines have made it more of a, I suppose, probably priority on how to do it and be more flexible. But other states are looking at us and going, well, how are they doing it? Why are they doing it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's terrific. And as you say, rates isn't usually that part of a council function that gets kudos, gets attention in a positive way. So this is a nice change. And you, I don't think, have been involved in this for a long time. You had one council before moving to Greater Dandenong, is that right?
Yeah, so I'm quite new to local government. So I've been in local government for just shy of 5 years now. So I've come in fresh and trying to, I don't know, I want to say shake things up, but it's probably not. It's probably more looking at how we do things and trying to improve it.
Bring a fresh approach, a
so.
new set of eyes. Because your background, I think, is tourism.
Correct.
Yeah,
tourism.
Big change, so. Sally.
Very, very big change from tourism. Dealing with holidays and people's experiences a lifetime to, dealing with everyday community issues. So
So while we're on that, just for those who perhaps have been in local government all of their careers or who are watching haven't worked in local government, what has that transition been like? Was it as you expected?
It's funny. So before I worked in local government, I am probably like most people, had no idea the breadth of services that local government offers. To once you get into it, it's incredible to see how many services that we can offer to our community that I think are untapped or unknown. So there's opportunities, I think.
Yeah, terrific. Well done. Great to have you in the sector and to be bringing this fresh approach that people are taking notice of. If people want to find out more about what you've done there, you're happy, obviously, to take calls from others or to take some contact by email, I
Absolutely.
guess. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
Sally Rice, Rates and Revenue Coordinator at the City of Greater Dandenong. I think people can probably find you based on that. So thank you so much for coming on VLGA Connect and telling us about the work you're doing there at Greater Dandenong.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Well, before we wrap up, a quick reminder of the member-exclusive Lunch and Learn session from the VLGA next Friday, the 27th of March, between 12 noon and 1 p.m, a free event that will explore psychosocial hazards and the Council's role as the CEO's employer. You'll gain insight into new legislation, understand the impact of culture, workload and role clarity, and ensure appropriate systems of support and accountability are in place. Leading the session will be the VLGA's Head of Local Government Programs and Policy, Dawn Bray, and the Managing Partner with Justicia Lawyers, Melissa Scadden. They'll break down the responsibilities for councillors under this emerging piece of legislation. That's coming up next week, Lunch and Learn on Friday the 27th of March, and all the details on the events page at the VLGA website. That wraps up VLGA Connect for this week. Thanks as always for joining us. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button on YouTube or your podcast player so you don't miss future episodes of the program. Until next time, thanks for watching and listening, and bye for now.